All right. Hi, everyone. The presentation will begin immediately after this short trailer capturing Tyrus's San Francisco premiere at the Castro Theater.
This film is really a hidden jewel. I came here not really knowing what I was going to see. It was just amazing.
Tyrus is an inspirational film about the art, life, and enduring impact of the 105-year-old pioneering Chinese-American artist Tyrus Wong, who is here, and his family. It has won an audience award at every festival it's played at.
Tyrus is like just this incredible introduction to somebody that everybody should know about.
It's a good film to really appreciate an artist, appreciate someone who is able to do what they love and be successful at it and live a good life.
What I liked about the film was the way it talked about how the movie Bambi was shaped so much by Tyrus's own vision.
And I really appreciated that this film gave an opportunity to, showcase an Asian immigrant and all of his art and all of his genius in the way that he has inspired an entire industry.
Tyrus brings such an amazing wealth of experiences to the table. His story really reminded me of my grandfather, who came over from Chile.
Here's someone who not only persevered, but just really succeeded in everything he did.
To see someone who made a living and created this just amazing artistic legacy, I think that's truly inspiring.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Let us situate ourselves by acknowledging the lands that we are on. I invite you to share in the chat where you are located and the names of the original inhabitants of that area. The Berkeley Public Library acknowledges that we sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Ohlone peoples. We honor with gratitude the land itself, as well as the Ohlone peoples who still live, work, and play in this region. The Berkeley Public Library condemns all forms of hatred, racism, and other forms of discrimination. We are outraged and saddened at the surge of hate crimes towards Asian American communities, as well as the racism that has been shown towards African American communities. We stand in solidarity with all marginalized peoples that have been subjected to hatred and intolerance, and celebrate the differences that contribute to the strength of our community. Everyone is welcome here at the Berkeley Public Library. My name is Perlita Payne, and I'm a librarian at the Berkeley Public Library. It is my great honor to welcome you all to our presentation and Q&A today, focused on the movie Tyrus, which is available for streaming for free all month long. I'm happy to report that 109 patrons have already streamed this movie, and that this event is generously funded by the Friends of the Berkeley Public Library. Please feel free to type your questions for our presenters into the chat box at any time. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Pamela Tom and Karen Fang. Pamela Tom is a documentary and narrative director and producer who made the documentary Tyrus. Ms. Tom is a recipient of the Walt Disney Writing Fellowship, Dorothy Arzner Award for Outstanding Woman Director, and Asian Pacific Women's Network Award. Karen Fang is a film scholar and cultural critic who is a regular contributor to the nationally broadcast radio series The Engines of Our Ingenuity, where her stories about technology and innovations focus on the visual arts. Ms. Fang's article about Tyrus Wong's best-selling Christmas cards appeared in Smithsonian Magazine last December, and currently she's working on a book about Tyrus Wong. Please welcome Pamela and Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Perlita. And thank you also, Perlita, for your wonderful opening comments about the importance of inclusion and diversity today more than ever, and a topic that Tyrus speaks to so directly. So I really appreciate that beginning. And I think I speak for Pam as well on that. So just to get us started, if you haven't seen Pam's amazing, wonderful, award-winning movie about Tyrus, Tyrus was an immigrant artist who was instrumental in the making of Disney's classic film, Bambi. So we're going to talk today about his remarkable life and artistic career, in which a Chinese immigrant facing American anti-immigration policy went on, fierce American anti-immigration policy, never transcended that to go on and shape some of America's most beloved imagery. But I thought it might be a good way for us to start today, since we're speaking with the Berkeley Public Library, to talk about Tyrus's connections to the Bay Area. And Pam, did you want to get us started with that?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Perlita, and thank you, Berkeley Public Library, for having us. Thank you, Karen. Yes, like many of the immigrants who arrived at the time that Tyrus did, they arrived at the Angel Island Immigration Detention Center, which we'll talk about more. But Tyrus also had his work shown and exhibited at many leading cultural institutions here in the Bay Area, including the De Young Museum, the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and more recently, the Disney Family Museum. And in particular, a particular connection to the Berkeley audience is that there was a Berkeley resident who discovered or brought to the attention one of Tyrus's paintings. Well, at the time, they didn't know it was Tyrus's paintings, but it was called the Chinese Jesus because it was a depiction of Jesus with very orientalized features. And anyway, long story short, this painting had been kind of hidden for over 80 years from the time that Tyrus had painted it. It was commissioned originally in LA, and the minister or the pastor who commissioned it thought it looked too Chinese or too Asian, to which Tyrus replied, well, how do you know what Jesus looked like? Or did you meet Jesus? So this painting ended up in San Francisco, where it hung for the next 80 years, and it was rediscovered by a Berkeley resident. So thank you to that person. And then Karen, do you want to continue a little about that painting?
Yeah, so you see a little bit of that sort of episode at the end of Pam's trailer about in the Tyrus film. And so the painting was discovered in 2013, around the time that Pam was in the final parts of editing the film. And so and I believe, Pam, wasn't it at the premiere that Tyrus actually signed the painting? So yes. The painting that had been lost, he had actually never signed for some reason. It's a very large painting, and so it was brought out for the opening night premiere. And so I just think it's just a wonderful, and actually we also have footage of what the very first time that Tyrus re-encountered it, and he had long forgot about the painting. And when the painting was found, his daughters actually had to try and convince him, well, I really think you should go see it. It could be that painting that you mentioned a long time ago. And at the time, he wasn't really up to it. His daughter Kim has a wonderful story about sort of, not really wanting to go, but sort of, at whatever age he was, 103 or something, sort of like still nevertheless going up the steep hills on Washington Street to the church and going in there and, and sort of being like, well, it could be mine. And what we see in the sort of footage of the very first time that he encounters this painting in over 70 years is he sort of goes through the motions of repainting the hand of the Chinese Jesus. And you see in Pam's trailer, the particular way of cocking the brush for calligraphy that's distinctive to Tyrus's sort of brushy style. And it's just a sort of wonderful, it was a wonderful sort of, yet another sort of coda in like this remarkable life that was full of so many episodes. That, this magnum opus in many ways, it's probably one of the biggest painting, beyond his murals, one of the biggest paintings Tyrus ever did. And then for it to surface so late in his long life was just, another sort of Hollywood moment, I think. But anyways, to move on. So as Pam said, there are so many sort of Bay Area connections about Tyrus Tyrus's story, but it also, as I think Perlita set us up for, Tyrus's story is a particularly meaningful and uplifting story at the end, you know, as we go into, as we've lived this long year of rising anti-Asian hate and harassment, sort of racial turmoil throughout the US. I mean, Tyrus died at the end of 2016, at the very end of 2016, you know, weeks after Trump's election, when there was a lot of fierce anti-immigrant policy movements as well. So I wonder, Pam, if you want to talk about sort of the relevance of Tyrus's story today.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think his story resonates with audiences today for two main reasons in particular. One is definitely the spate of anti-Asian violence that people are seeing, just especially in the last year. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Chinese Americans have been experiencing that since they first started arriving in the US back in the 1840s and 1850s. So, and the second one is really this increased attention placed on the importance of representation in Hollywood. And you know, the recent wins at the Oscars by Asian Americans, and you know, it sort of people are learning and interested in the pioneers who paved the way for these artists today. And you know, Tyrus was doing this back in the 1930s when there were virtually, you know, very few Asians working in Hollywood. So his story is resonating because it is so interesting and because he was a pioneer. So I want to kind of turn to the first clip that we want to share. For those of you who have seen the film, this is a clip that takes place at Angel Island. We invited him to go back there. Angel Island was created to help detain, or the main purpose was to detain Chinese to try to send them back to China because there was so much anti-Chinese sentiment at the time. And so he arrived at the age of 9, and this clip will give you a little, shows you that visit back to Angel Island and where he talks about his experience. Can you please roll that clip, Casey? Thank you.
Angel Island was in the San Francisco Bay to be a kind of Ellis Island of the West. Although at Ellis Island, we think of that as being a very welcoming place, the purpose of Angel Island was to keep the Chinese out.
What season did you arrive? What month?
Oh, gee, I forgot. In fact, I was just worrying about my father, whether I could get a chance to see him again, you know.
So the first day you were separated?
Yeah, separated. Yeah. All of a sudden, he's gone. I was scared half to death. I just cried, you know. When, oh, don't cry. You'll see your father maybe a few days or maybe a month.
Some people, when they arrived, were able to pass through in maybe 2 days. Some people stayed as long as 2 years.
They call it a wooden house.
It's a very lonely situation. There's no other kid but myself. And I don't speak English.
No place to go, so they just cover with their own jackknife or something like that, you know, cover thing.
So it just suffered that, you know, whatever day I stay there, was every day is just miserable, miserable. I hated that place.
Pam, I love how that clip that you selected introduces us to the horror that Angel Island was, and like the US, like systemic systemic anti-Chinese, anti-Asian policy that was designed to keep Chinese and Asians out, ideally, or if they were in, to keep them like housed, detained, and then the clip, and then if they were actually able to enter at a sort of subordinate position where they didn't have the same civil rights as the rest as other Americans. But what I love about your clip is that it also includes the Angel Island poetry, right? The detainees carved on the walls, and so it sort of it hints at the person that Tyrus would become, that he wasn't broken by being a 9-year-old boy separated from his father. He spent a month alone in Angel Island, but like the poetry around him, he was able to find strength and expression in art. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about that connection between discrimination and exclusion and aesthetics.
Well, actually, what I'd like to first note, just watching this clip again, is the parallels to today in the separation of children and parents. Little did I know that when we filmed that back in, gosh, I don't remember exactly what year we filmed that this would be happening. This would be part of US, immigration policy. So that to me is really sobering and kind of chilling, that Tyrus lived that the US has no qualms about separating children from their parents. And it's very traumatizing, for them. Also, just the Chinese must go. There's, all that propaganda and the imagery that just kind of whips up. It's that xenophobia. We really haven't changed all that much, really, from that time. So, in answer to your earlier question, why does it, why is it relevant to today? I think that clip alone kind of speaks volumes as to why it is. I don't know if I answered your question about the tie between aesthetics, but that's what was resonating for me when I was watching this.
I think that there's two things. Like, one is that he was like every Chinese who had to endure the conditions of exclusion, right? And what you're pointing out is that, sadly, 100 years later, the U.S., the climate doesn't seem to. There are many. The climate seems it recalls like this earlier, more difficult time. At the same time, what's also really interesting is that Tyrus was a unique, exceptional person given his artistic ability, right? And so and I think that there's something particularly unique and valuable about art that, is as a very specific version of the Asian American story, right? But that gives us a different way to think about the hardship and transcendence,
yes,
and perseverance.
Yes, and I think when we come to the end of the film, you really see how his creativity, his artist's eye, his ability to constantly kind of reimagine how things can be is what served him so well and what allowed him to survive to this ripe age of 106. But yeah. So
you want to talk about what he had, the sort of context, the artistic context of the world that he entered into professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect segue. So this next clip is called The Orientalist. And The Orientalist was a term that curators and critics used to describe this group of Asian American artists, both on the North, the Bay Area and Los Angeles, who were creating art. Many of them were Western trained, but who were really inspired by their own Asian roots and their culture and bringing that to their art. So that's why they were called the Orientalists. I don't think they referred to themselves as that, but anyway, it was a convenient term. And this was the one thing that really blew me away in the course of my research, that I had never heard of them. I didn't, you always grow up thinking, oh, Asians don't go into the arts. That's just an impossible career choice for all sorts of reasons. But the fact that this was in the 30s and that there was this it was almost like a movement of this active group of Asian artists doing some really fascinating things. And we'll talk about this after we show the clip. So Casey, could we please see clip 2, The Orientalist?
It was my grandfather who had a Chinese antique store down in Chinatown, and everybody sort of congregated around him. So there was Tyrus Wong and Hideo Date. There was Benji Okubo, who was a Japanese-American artist at the Art Students League, and Gilbert Leong, who went to Chenard. My grandfather at one point thought, well, we have a mezzanine above the antique store where I could put a gallery. He put together what is believed to be the very first Asian American art exhibition to have been held in the country.
They were open, they were young. Most of these guys were like 18 to 22 years old.
These Asian American artists were actually drawing on something that they already felt a sense of ownership about, cultural ownership. It was a time in which people's attitudes about Chinese were beginning to shift. They were fueled by the broader public interest of exoticizing Chinese culture.
The love, the movement.
Oh, yeah, the brush stroke, yeah. The painting real fast. The brush about this side, I think.
Really big brush.
Yeah.
Do you remember doing that one? There was an exhibit that included artists not just from Los Angeles, but also from the San Francisco Bay Area. These were the very first exhibits anywhere of these artists as a group, as a movement.
It was an exciting time for artists like Tyrus and the California Orientalists to be gaining ground, gaining visibility. Again, this is all taking place while Chinese immigration is illegal. Chinese people couldn't testify in courts, especially against a white person. They couldn't own property, and they couldn't marry outside of their race. It was a hostile environment.
These artists created a sort of synergy by coming together to exhibit their work, and a great reputation that led to these museum invitations. I think of it as a renaissance because there were so many different things happening all at the same time.
So that's a really excellent introduction to sort of American ambivalence or Western ambivalence about the presence of Asians, like both physically and in terms of art. So on the one hand, they didn't want Asian bodies in the nation. On the other hand, they were growing increasingly interested in Asia, the long and rich tradition of Chinese painting and calligraphy and Japanese printmaking as well. And so you see that in the sort of opportunities that were available in the fine arts in Pam's clip. And I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit more about that, Pam, and also talk about the other side of Tyrus's career, which is the shift to commercial art and the sort of question of Asian representation in Hollywood during the time that he was working.
Yeah, sure. The thing that really struck me about this group of artists is that they were really creating their own narratives. Here they were surrounded by just very stereotypical images of them, mostly, negative. And here they were painting, they were putting themselves, their own images into their own paintings. They were working together. So they were collaborating, they were supporting each other. They had advocates like Lisa C's grandfather, Eddie C., who wasn't an artist, but he was, spending every penny he had to help support these artists. And this is something that I think we can all learn from, and that we all still continue to do. We have to, as artists of color, to be able to move forward. So they were doing this way back in the 30s, defining and creating and reimagining their own narratives. So yeah, Tyrus was a fine artist, but he also had to get a job. He got married. A baby was on its way. He had to support himself. So this next clip is okay. So Tyrus went to Otis, and one of the common places that people who graduated out of art school and needed a job went to was the studios, in particular Disney Studio, because they really appreciated artists at the time. And so, well, they still do, but that was a popular place to go. So this next clip is called Asians in Hollywood. And I paint a context, a picture of what Hollywood was like at the time Tyrus first applied for a job at the Disney Studios. So if you could please play clip 3, Casey.
Hollywood, and animation in particular, was very much an old boys club during the 30s and 40s and even into the 50s. The number of minorities working in the whole film industry was fairly small then. There were not a lot of Asian or Asian American actors or African American actors who played much beyond villainous Fu Manchu characters or servants.
Take it away, please. The plate, take it away.
You find those prejudices repeated in a lot of the cartoons of the era. There are lots of jokes about things being stamped kosher, although there were a lot of Jews working in Hollywood then. Italians have big noses and run fruit stands. Chinese jabber incomprehensible syllables and run laundries. It's not a pretty picture, but it's one that reflects a good deal of the attitudes there.
So in these two clips, we really get a sort of, this encapsulates the worlds that Tyrus bridge between Hollywood and Chinatown, between fine and commercial art, between animation and live action, right? But of course, Bambi is the legacy for which Tyrus is most known today, and the reason why most people probably have heard of him or might be drawn to his story. So it's really interesting to think about, given the context of like sort of Western interest in Asian aesthetics, but the sort of stereotypical, highly sort of caricatures that were portrayed in Hollywood, that Tyrus was able to exercise such an influence on Bambi. So Pam, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And those clips from the 30s of animation, those very stereotypical imagery, it really shows how important it is to create, new images and to really contextualize those. If you see films that continue to have those, they're so damaging. They're so dehumanizing. You think of the Atlanta shooter. It was like, in his mind, he's got these sexualized, Asian women that need to be killed so that he doesn't act on his own fantasies or whatever. So these are just so damaging, which is why it's so important to have more representation in Hollywood. And Tyrus here, he's coming into it. He actually never went to the movies. I don't think he had time. I don't think he had the money. But again, Disney Studios was a place where a starving artist could go and get a job. So I'm going to just jump into this next clip because we're running a little bit out of time and we have several more clips to show. Tyrus had gotten married. A baby was along the way. He had an entry-level job at Disney as an in-betweener, which was, you can watch the film, but it's just suffice it to say, it was a very lowly entry-level job that was extremely tedious, and he hated it. So this next clip shows what he does in response to that, and what he does about that. Casey, if you could please show the next clip.
I discovered that they were making Bambi about the deer in the forest. So during the weekend at home, I started working the tiny little sketches. I'm mainly a landscape painter anyway,
Here was a guy that was painting in a really loose, atmospheric style, and detail wasn't as important as shape and color and composition.
My job is, to paint as many sketches I could set in the atmosphere. Like early in the morning when, very foggy, where else there's snow, and then the fire.
Bambi stands out for being just so singularly beautiful and having a style that's as unique and strong as any of the great Disney features. Part of that is Tyrus's personal style, and part of that is drawing on the traditions of Chinese art.
You could actually see brushstrokes on the screen. They were it sort of gave you the idea of a whole bunch of leaves or a bush, but they were brushstrokes.
It's only really happened a few other times where the entire studio will cleave to one artist's style. It happened on Sleeping Beauty. Walt said, okay, we're doing Ivan Earl. But it happened on Bambi as well. You know, okay, we're doing Taiwan.
The funny thing, you know, I never met Walt. At the 3.5 years, I never, I just simply come in for a story meeting and so forth, but nobody introduced me to him. Maybe because they think I'm Chinese and I don't know.
Though he doesn't like to talk about it, Tyrus has said there were people who did treat him differently because he was Chinese, because he had an accent. He wasn't a good wasp.
There was jealousy as well, that he had moved up so quickly. Tyrus said that there were some people that, they didn't know why they were taking orders from him, indirect orders through Tom Kodrick.
He's very, very nice to me. He said, Tyrus, don't get discouraged. Some guy, this and that, so don't pay attention. You just do your own work, do your work, and so forth. As long as Walt likes your work, it's okay,
Tyrus was credited as one of the background painters, but that's not what he did. He was that film in terms of the design, and he was not properly credited for it.
I so many times I never get tired of the story. So just a little bit of more background for people. So Disney had, when they just started working on Bambi, they were coming off of Snow White, which is the world's first full-length animated feature. Walt had made a splash in Hollywood. He was plowing money into what he wanted. He wanted to continue this momentum. And amazingly, what he quickly found out was that these really acclaimed artists that he had handpicked from Europe, who had made Snow White possible, just could not do Bambi, which is a completely different animal, literally, right? And so Tyrus, back in the back offices of In-Betweenings, thinks that he has an idea, right? And what's so wonderful about his story is that he solves the problem by effectively sort of sneaking in Chinese painting, right? Because he realizes that this project, the natural world of Bambi's forest, right, is not something that needs to be rendered with the detail and fiddliness, right, of a fairy tale castle, right? The natural world needs to be evoked by feeling and emotion, because that's the world of the animals, right? And so Tyrus literally imports, right, the traditions of Chinese painting into commercial art, right? The very Hollywood milieu that is so engaged in stereotyping them or collaborating and keeping Asians invisible altogether, right? And so I think this really encapsulates the sort of power of Tyrus's story, that when the US wanted to make Asians invisible, not only did he refuse that invisibility, he embraced visibility by using his art.
Yeah. There was a great article in the New York Times in the art section, and I think it was called how how Sung Dynasty art, 1,000-year-old Sung Dynasty art influenced the look of Bambi. And, we had a double billing of Bambi and Tyrus at the Egyptian Theater that was put on by the Art Directors Guild. And it's such a different viewing experience to watch Tyrus and then watch Bambi right after that, because you see just the style in such a different light. Because I grew up watching it. I watched it, I loved it. I never understood why I loved it. And now you can really appreciate it more. So I encourage all of you who haven't seen Bambi in a while to try to see it, and try to see it on as big a screen as possible. And you'll have a really different experience and appreciation for it.
Right, because once you know that that's the key to the intervention that he makes, right? You can't not recognize that what's actually going on there is traditional classical Chinese painting, right? And so it opens a whole other world, not just the natural world, but a whole different aesthetic legacy, right?
It continues to influence animators today.
Yeah.
They're constantly looking to Tyrus's work on Bambi in their work today. He was asked, the art director on Finding Nemo said that film would not look the way it does without Tyrus's influence. And he was asked to come back. Yeah.
Right. And then so you have, as I think it's Tom Zito who says, only a few times in the history of the studio did the entire studio have to follow a single artist. But in the case of Bambi, it did. There's no question about it. Right. It's arguably even more obvious, right? Because the kind of the painting style is so different. But then, of course, there is the history of his miscrediting, right? And then, I know that Pam, you want to talk about that and maybe sort of connect that to some of the other ways that Asians were rendered invisible during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a mystery as to why he was, or maybe it's not a mystery as to why he was credited as a background, one of many background artists. One, he was not a background artist. He was the art, in today's parlance, he would have been the art director. And if, you know, he's commonly now recognized as being the conceptual artist. Really, everything flowed out of Tyrus's paintings that he would bring in and just show to everybody, the musicians, the animators, to the other background artists. So why that happened, I don't know. Maybe the same reason that he never got to meet Walt Disney. But, you know, that did change later on while Tyrus was still alive, and he's well recognized for his contributions, but it's just unfortunate that he wasn't at that time.
He was named a Disney legend in 2001.
Yeah, they definitely made up for errors. And one thing about just recognition and stuff, one thing that Tyrus's father did do is he taught him at a very young age to sign everything he created. Even if it was just a sketch on a napkin or something, he's like, sign it. And I think he instinctively knew the importance of authorship and to claim that. And so Tyrus signed almost everything. I mean, there are a few paintings that are unsigned by him, but you know, his production illustrations at Warner Brothers, he signs a lot of them. So that was a good thing. Even if society or the studios weren't looking after him and his recognition, at least he was signing his work. And then his wife, Ruth, contributed a lot to his financial health. She was kind of his manager, and she taught him to really ask for compensation, you know, really receive the money that he deserved for his work. I'm just going to jump to the next clip, unless you.
Well, if I could just say a little bit about Ruth, because she's such an important part of Tyrus's story. Ruth herself has another fascinating Asian American history. She was the last child of a large pioneer Chinese family that had been hugely important in expanding Bakersfield. Ruth had gone to UCLA and studied English literature, and so the combination of the two really was like invincible, right? And together they were going to have a family that would then be sort of marched out as examples of Asian American assimilation, right? So just as Pam says, like, you know, Ruth was so important in sort of helping Tyrus's ascendance and success, personal and professional success.
And kind of navigate the white commercial world, because Tyrus kind of struggled with his English. Ruth was an English major from UCLA. She did all his correspondences, and he really depended on her to help him. Because, you know, if you think about it, Tyrus was working not in Chinatown where it was safe and comfortable, but in Hollywood, you know, in the fine art world, in the commercial, like greeting card, Hallmark, you know, all these worlds that were just so unfamiliar to him. And he really depended on Ruth to help navigate those worlds.
Right, because he was often the only one. He was often the only Chinese or the only Asian in these professional circles.
Exactly. So in this next clip, which is World War II and anti-Asian hate, you know, again, his world kind of gets torpedoed by the outbreak of World War II and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So we're going to show this, next. So this was right after he got, well, I'll just tell you, but he got fired from Disney. So this happens right after that, just a few months after that. So Casey, if you could please show clip 5.
The attack was carried out by Jap torpedo planes. The Far Eastern double-crossers had their ships and planes on the way for the sneak punch.
The Japanese being sent to internment camps, this is a terrible blot on our history. But it was very difficult for the Chinese at that time too, particularly in the West. People would stop Chinese in the street, throw them in the street, you know, beat them up.
I'm afraid that somebody might mistake, you know. Yeah. So I'm about, usually when I go to say China, well, Chinese or something like that. I wish so cousin. Well, things like that.
One of Tyrus's very closest friends, Benji Okubo, is sent off to the internment camp. Although he taught painting and did some painting in the camps, once he got out, he never painted again. They never really came together again as a group or as a movement after the war. So whatever momentum they had had just completely melted away.
So as I was saying earlier, right, art can do so much to try to counteract visibility, but then, you know, it's always a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing. And so World War II, which was so problematic, so a crisis moment for Asian Americans of all kinds, right? Japanese, Chinese, the Chinese not forced to internment, but in case for every Chinese was imperiled by people's inability to tell the difference between Chinese, different types of Asians. And for Tyrus in particular, he lost a pure circle of artists that had been so important to his early development as a fine artist.
I think this clip really underscores how Asians are perpetually seen as foreigners. So, you know, the Japanese Americans were interned. You know, it's so interesting that Tyrus wore a button that said China or I'm Chinese.
I am Chinese.
I am Chinese. You wouldn't wear that button over this last year. That would be actually really dangerous, but it just goes to show that there's that we're always seen as foreigners. Just no matter, you know, my family's been here since the 1870s, 1860s, and that doesn't really matter to you know, somebody looking at me. And Tyrus was acutely aware of how US foreign policy was tied and related to the treatment of Asians. He always said that if the US ever went to war with China, he believed he would be interned into like a camp like his Japanese friends had been. So, you know, at first I was like, oh, that would never happen, but you know, it really could have happened. So yeah, I think that clip sort of points to all of those.
He also took a lot of pride in, towards the end of his life, the president of Otis Art School, where he had gotten started with these scholarships, was a Chinese man, I think originally from Hong Kong, right? So he loved, you know, again, to always note, he was wary of like going backwards, but always, you know, was proud of progress. I know, Pam, we're watching the clock. Do you want to direct us toward the sort of last?
We only have 3 clips left. This next one is really short. It's his experience buying a house. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, we hear a lot now about generational wealth and the redlining and the inability for people of color to buy houses. These laws apply to Asians as well, and you'll see in this clip how it impacted Tyrus directly. If you could please play clip number 6. Thank you.
When we're looking for a house, you look at me, you know that we're, you know, Asian. She said, oh, I'm sorry, the house already sold. And then a month, 2 months go back there, the sign is still there.
In Los Angeles, deeds were allowed to say no blacks, no Chinese, no Jews, no Armenians. I mean, this was all utterly explicit.
The Chinese for a long time could only live in Chinatown. It wasn't until 1948 that the laws were changed that someone who was of Chinese descent could own property in the state of California.
Before he moved out to Sunland, he had the realtor go knock on doors of the neighbors and ask them how they feel about a Chinese family moving in. Because if they don't want us to move in, then, you know, obviously wasn't going to move there. They both said, no, we don't have a problem with that. We have Chinese friends, so we moved in. Not the whole neighborhood was that way, but those 2 people were.
Okay, and then just in time, Pam, do you want to introduce the last 2?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, you know, Tyrus kind of towed the line. He kind of picked his battles, you know, he wanted to get permission. I don't know if people would do that today, but he wanted to make sure that it was okay. You know, now years later, when he was about to turn around, when he turned 90, he's finally started getting his due. People were recognizing him. Institutions were reaching out to him, wanting to honor him and, you know, have him speak. So this next clip points to his legacy and his recognition 60 years later. So we could play clip 7, please.
One of the most outstanding pioneers of our Chinese American community here in Los Angeles was Tyrus Wong. Not only was he noted here in our Chinatown community, but he bridged the gap of the old culture with the new culture.
Right, how are you?
And broadened it to the film industry where it's gone all over the world. And thank you again and congratulations.
I wish my pa and ma were here.
He's probably proudest of the fact that he was successful and he was Chinese and that he managed to fight through the racial barriers that existed back then.
I've gone through so many different things, like, you know, different presidents and so forth, but I think, well, what the heck, I mean, you know, I'm not gonna keep on, you know, thinking about it. It's just, that's not good for my health.
Our next legend had a brief but impactful Disney career. His name is Tyrus Wong, and he only worked at the studio for 3 years, and during that time devoted himself to just one movie, Bambi. But what a film it was.
For that one contribution, he is legendary and constantly on the minds of everyone here.
This exhibition is exciting and poignant for this area. He came to the United States through Angel Island, which is right across the bay. Amongst his colleagues and many artists to this day, they consider his art as some of the most exquisite, beautiful art that was produced at the Disney Studios.
Is very, very much admired. He's been much more influential than he would ever acknowledge or probably even realizes.
Pretty good work. I think you have a future.
Tyrus's story is like an incredible flower growing amidst concrete and stone. It's so unlikely, and that's what makes it so, so valuable.
Yeah. Do we have time to show that last clip? Because I think we can kind of tie up everything after we show the last clip and then kind of talk about
let's do it.
legacy.
Go
You
for
sure?
it.
Okay. All right. Last one's just a minute and a half. So can you just go ahead and play the last clip? Please. Thanks.
I'm happy as long as I get up in the morning and see the sun. I think I had a pretty good life.
I'm so glad that we were able to squeeze in that last clip, because it really gets across the sort of lesson of everybody who knows about Tyrus's life, and at the story that Pam's film shares so well, which is that despite everything that he had endured, and even with all the accolades that he was able to get towards the end of his long and remarkable life, like Tyrus never looked back, right? He always looked forward. And I know one of the things he would always joke about was he used to love fishing, but with fishing, you always look down. He switched to kite flying because with kite flying, you always look up. And I think like that's the wonderful lesson, right, about Tyrus's life is to persevere and to transcend. And kites are, the last art medium that he worked in, and such a great sort of symbol of Tyrus's spirit.
Yeah, there's such a metaphor. And, he was inspired by the kites in China when he was a young boy. So he really kind of came full circle. And where he flies them is the Santa Monica Beach, which is the ocean that he crossed when he was 10 years old. So there's like this beautiful kind of symmetry to his life story. And he was flying kites up till really the last year of his life. On that note, maybe we should, I think we have 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Welcome any questions.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It was so wonderful and captivating. And somebody else said beautiful. So yeah, please type away with your questions. You can even try to unmute your mic if you want to speak.
And we'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, it's always a good
Katz, I see you. My old film school buddy.
Oh, that's great.
Hi, Pam.
Hi,
Nice work.
Michael. Thank you. Ask a question.
There is a comment from Evelyn who wrote that Cyrus was not alone in fearing the Chinese would be interned if the USA went to war with China. As a kid, I always had that fear as well. So, and Arlene has her hand up. If you would like to unmute, Arlene, go ahead.
I really enjoyed this. I came in late, but really enjoyed it. And I know that you can get a copy of the film. Is that correct?
Yes.
You can stream it for free. There's a link on the website. So if you look in the events, there's going to be a registration that you fill out, and then you'll get the link and you can watch it on your computer all month long.
Okay, perfect.
And if you want to buy it, you could go to the Etsy store, and Tyrus Wong's daughter is selling DVDs on her site. I think it's just Tyrus Wong at Etsy or Amazon, but go to Etsy. Support Tyrus' daughter.
And speaking of Kim's Tyrus Wong Etsy site, one thing that we didn't even have time to talk about was actually the medium for which Tyrus was most famous in his own lifetime, which was his Christmas cards. So from the 50s to the 70s, Tyrus was one of the nation's most recognized greeting card artists for Christmas cards, which he did in his distinctly sort of fusion style. So behind me is an enlargement of one of his Christmas cards. And you can also buy reprints of Tyrus's Christmas cards on Kim's website. And I think it's just so wonderful the way in which Tyrus like refused to sort of hide what was seemed exotic and strange, but actually turned it into a virtue. And that in the case of the Christmas cards, people lapped it up, and they knew that they were buying Tyrus Wong. They were marketed under his name, and almost all the cards are signed. And I think that's such a wonderful example of sort of American multiculturalism, right? That a man who had never celebrated Christmas until he was married and was bringing in this Chinese painting designs was one of the nation's most successful Christmas card artists.
I'm going to share that wonderful article that you have, Karen, there in the Smithsonian for people who missed it the first time. And let me see here. I don't think another question came in just yet. If anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes left.
I will say, just because we started by talking about the Bay Area's ties to Tyrus and the Chinese Jesus, that the Chinese Jesus is in desperate need of conservation. And whatever people want to contribute towards supporting that, I think it's such an important painting that deserves to be maintained for Asian American history, for Tyrus Wong's biography, for American history. Right. And because it has a place in, because right now it resides in San Francisco, and San Francisco's Chinatown, the oldest and largest Chinatown in America, I think it's such it's a asset, a cultural it's a cultural treasure that the Bay Area should be proud of.
And I see that David Lay, who we referenced earlier in the presentation, is on here. David, I don't know if you're there. If you could, I don't know if you could tell people how they might be able to support that, the restoration of that painting.
Well, right now we don't have a fund set up. It's just back of my mind, but maybe we should start that very soon. Because if it's restored, it should go to maybe even the Smithsonian, whoever will hang it, or the San Francisco Fine Art Museum, or even LACMA. So yes, let me get this project going. Thank you, Karen, for pushing me.
And thank you, David, for helping discover it and bring it to the public eye.
What is the name of the church for people who are curious?
Well, maybe we should keep it a secret because I don't want someone to break in for the time being.
Oh.
Or even to look? No?
I don't believe it's available to the public. It's on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the painting is too fragile to be shown on display.
So I have updates on all things related to Tyrus on our Facebook page. So it's Tyrus the movie or Tyrus the documentary. It's on Facebook. If you go and you like it, I'm constantly posting new things about his art, any exhibitions, any screenings, and I'll certainly, if there's a fund or any updates on this painting, I'll post it there. But it's Tyrus the documentary on Facebook. Tyrus the documentary.
Right, and then Keith said they saw the film on PBS.
Yeah.
So it's aired on PBS. That's wonderful.
It premiered on American Masters. So very happy, and thank you. It was a big coup. My dream was to get it on there because Tyrus is an American master, right? So.
Well, and Pam, I remember seeing one time somebody had posted in the comments section or something that like in PBS that like the bio on Walt Disney was just American experience, but the bio on Tyrus was American masters. And they thought that was wonderful, you know, like retribution for being miscredited.
It's great.
I was very struck that it took them 60 years to fully recognize him. I found that to be heartbreaking, but not surprising, considering the levels of erasures that has happened.
Well, and also there, you know, I was saying earlier that often he was the only Chinese or the only Asian, but you know, the thing about Walt was that he just wanted to hire the best to realize his vision. So he didn't really care where you came from or whether you could speak English at all, as long as he thought that you were going to be a service to Disney. And so at that time that Tyrus was there, the special effects department consisted of two people. They were both immigrants, an Italian American and another Chinese American who had come by way of Hawaii. And they were completely disparate personalities, completely different styles, but everything that was complicated animation problems, like the raindrops in Bambi during the raindrop sequence, were the result of those two animators, those two immigrant animators. And the other Chinese, Cyrus Yang, ended up ultimately killing himself. And so when you see like the disparate stories between Tyrus living 106 and Cy Yang, who was, you know, didn't have a friend network from art school, like was a very different personality, right? You know, it just reiterates like the huge cost of being a minority, right? And making your way, of being the first, right?
I think we have time for one more question or comment from the audience. Anybody?
Pam, do you want to say anything about like what it means to you to be like, are there new ideas or thoughts that you've had since wrapping the film back in 2015? After, we should also, I don't know if people know, Pam worked on the film for 17 years, right? So, because how do you do justice to a life that was 106 years, right? So Pam, are there things that like new thoughts that you've had since wrapping the film 6 or 7 years ago?
You know, I guess my thoughts are that his legacy endures, that he continues to influence young people, and there's a real timelessness to his work and his story too. You know, I think his story is so universal, in that this immigrant who came to this country as a young boy with a dream, and he fulfilled that dream. I mean, it's and you know, when I hear all this anti-immigrant rhetoric, I just say, just go see the movie. You know, just see what had Tyrus been sent back to China, right? If he had missed a question, if he had answered it incorrectly, we would not have Bambi, we would not have a lot of animation as it is today. We would not have these beautiful cards and beautiful artwork. So, you know, this is just a reminder that we need to just remember the stories and the contributions of immigrants. I know that sounds so cliched and corny, but this is what resonates with me all these years after having first met him.
And now more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lovely way to end. And I'm just so grateful that you both could come today and have this presentation here for us. Would you like to make some quick closing remarks?
No, just I would just echo everything that Pam said. I mean, Tyrus has been, Tyrus just created a circle of people who like loved him and just like were inspired by his story. And all we ever want to do is just to keep on growing those ripples of adoration and admiration.
And inspiration to new generations of artists. And
Thank you so much, Pam and Karen.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful presentation. Thanks everybody for coming.
Okay.
And please visit our website, berkeleypubliclibrary.org, to find other programs and events.
All right.
Thank you.